Welcome to History American. This is a space for conversation and reflection, where we explore scientific, social, environmental, political, economic, and statistical topics, as well as current events and stories. In every episode, we analyze and break down key events to help us better understand the reality around us. Find us for free on your favorite platform. You can also support this podcast by becoming a supporter of this documentary series or directly via PayPal or cryptocurrency. We accept contributions in Bitcoin, Ethereum, or Solana. You can find all the details in the description of this content. Follow us, share, and join the conversation.
Thank you so much for having me today. I'm really excited to get into this one.
Yeah, it's going to be a wild one. So I want you to imagine holding a single piece of paper. And on this paper is the mathematical power to, basically end human civilization.
Right.
It is the most guarded, most heavily funded secret in the history of the world. Now imagine taking that exact piece of paper, walking onto a college campus, and casually handing it over to a foreign agent.
I mean, it sounds like the plot of some over-the-top espionage thriller. It sounds entirely like fiction.
Yeah.
But it is an absolute documented reality of the dawn of the atomic age.
You know, we usually look at the Manhattan Project as this pristine moment of scientific triumph. The narrative we're taught is just so clean.
Very clean.
Right. We built a machine, the machine worked, the Second World War ended, and the history books just point to it and say, there it is. But the moment you actually peel back the official story, that clean narrative just completely shatters.
It really does. We are looking at a historical landscape that is incredibly murky.
Absolutely. So today's deep dive isn't just about the physics of splitting the atom. It is an exploration of the profound paranoia, the verified spies, the alleged government cover-ups, the environmental scandals, and...
the aliens.
Yes, the aliens. Some of the most bizarre extraterrestrial claims that orbit the legacy of this massive endeavor. We are talking about a $2.2 billion, 130,000 person project.
Yeah, and to put that financial figure into perspective for the listener, $2.2 billion back in the 1940s is the equivalent of well over $30 billion today.
Wow.
And what is truly fascinating here is the absolute paradox of the whole situation. You have the United States government trying to keep the largest industrial and scientific undertaking in human history completely invisible.
Which seems impossible.
Right. They were employing over 130,000 people across these secret cities. We are talking about entire municipalities, complete with schools, bowling alleys, and movie theaters that simply did not exist on any official map.
I really want to dig into the mechanics of that secrecy because it almost defies logic. I mean, how do you hide 130,000 people?
It's staggering.
Look at Oak Ridge, Tennessee. This place functioned essentially as a massive corporate town for employees and their families. It sat on government-owned land, it was completely surrounded by fences, there were armed guards at every single entrance, and it housed around 75,000 people. But the truly staggering part is that the vast majority of these workers had absolutely no idea what they were actually building.
Yeah, and that was achieved through a revolutionary, albeit kind of draconian, system of extreme compartmentalization. Think of it like a massive symphony orchestra where every single musician is given sheet music that contains only one single note.
Okay, I like that analogy.
They play their note perfectly when they're told to, but they never actually hear the entire song. Workers at Oak Ridge were turning dials, they were monitoring pressure gauges, moving barrels, doing these highly isolated tasks without ever seeing the big picture.
Right, and then you have Los Alamos, New Mexico, which was also known under this incredibly vague codename Project Y.
Project Y, yeah.
It sounds like something out of a comic book. And the isolation there was even more intense. You have roughly 5,000 residents, but they didn't even have formal addresses.
Right, no street names or anything.
Exactly. If you wanted to send a letter to anyone in this town, everything was routed to a single P.O. box, number 1663. Even the babies born there, they had Santa Fe listed on their birth certificates just to hide the town's existence.
It's wild.
You couldn't just pack up and go into town for a coffee. You needed explicit military approval just to leave the perimeter.
And, the compartmentalization was enforced with such rigidity that the very highest levels of the United States government were kept totally in the dark.
Right.
Henry Agard Wallace, the Vice President of the United States, was largely unaware of the true nature, the staggering scale, and the ultimate purpose of the weapon they were developing.
The Vice President.
The Vice President.
Yeah.
And the man tasked with maintaining this impossibly tight lid was General Leslie Richard Groves. He was the military head of the project, and alongside the counterintelligence corps, he attempted to create a total airtight vacuum.
Yeah, they plastered billboards everywhere.
Exactly. Billboards reminding people that what you see here stays here. They aggressively screened mail, monitored phone calls, and they even had plainclothes agents actively following scientists to see who they spoke with off hours.
And yet, despite building the most secure fortress in human history to guard this secret, the front door was basically just left wide open.
It really was.
Because the leaks that happened, they weren't just accidental misplacements of classified documents. The most damaging leaks were deliberate, calculated acts of espionage.
Right. And to understand the climate of this espionage, we really have to look at the global board at the time. The Soviet Union was a vital ally of the United States during the Second World War.
Right, they were fighting the Nazis together.
Exactly. They were absorbing the brunt of the Nazi war machine on the Eastern Front. However, beneath that alliance, due to the fundamental ideological divide between capitalism and communism, there was this profound, deeply entrenched mutual distrust.
Yeah.
The Soviets actually knew something massive was happening in American physics well before they had spies on the inside.
How did they know that?
Well, they realized that American physicists had suddenly universally stopped publishing papers on nuclear fission in academic journals.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. To the Soviet scientists, that sudden coordinated silence was absolutely deafening. It signaled that fission was no longer theoretical, it was military.
That silence practically handed the Soviets a map with a giant X on it.
It really did.
And that brings us to the individuals who actually handed over the treasure, specifically Theodore Hall. The story of Theodore Hall is wild.
It really is.
He was a mathematics and physics prodigy. He entered Harvard University at the age of just 16. By the time he was a teenager, he was recruited to become the youngest scientist working at Los Alamos.
Just a kid, really?
Just a kid. He is brilliant, he is trusted, but he is carrying a massive secret.
Right. So, while studying at Harvard University, Theodore Hall became deeply involved with a Marxist student organization. And during this time, he shared a dorm room with a young man named Seville Sachs.
Right, Seville Sachs.
Seville Sachs was the son of Russian immigrants and an extraordinarily ardent vocal communist. And it was actually Seville Sachs who recognized Theodore Hall's access and recruited him to work for the Soviet Union.
Wow.
Seville Sachs volunteered to act as the primary courier, moving the nuclear secrets that Theodore Hall would steal right out of the New Mexico desert and into the hands of Soviet handlers.
So let's look at what Theodore Hall actually leaked. Because he didn't just pass along vague concepts about, atom splitting. He handed over the absolute crown jewels of the Manhattan Project.
He did.
He leaked the crucial, highly specific intelligence on the implosion method for the Fat Man plutonium bomb.
And this requires us to dive into the physics for a moment to really grasp the magnitude of what he gave them.
Please do.
So the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, which was called Little Boy, used a relatively straightforward gun-type mechanism. It essentially fired a subcritical piece of uranium down a literal gun barrel into another piece of uranium to achieve critical mass.
Okay, so fairly simple collision.
Exactly. It was so simple, relatively speaking, that scientists were entirely confident it would work without even testing it. But the bomb dropped on Nagasaki, the Fat Man bomb, used plutonium.
And plutonium is a completely different beast.
Entirely different. Plutonium-239 is inevitably contaminated with the isotope plutonium-240, which has an incredibly high rate of spontaneous fission.
So it's unstable.
Very. If you tried to use the simple gun method with plutonium, it would literally begin to detonate before the two pieces fully came together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, resulting in a fizzle, which is a massive, dirty, conventional explosion, but no nuclear yield. To make plutonium work, the scientists had to invent an entirely new, mind-bogglingly complex method. Implosion.
Implosion.
Right. You have to take a subcritical sphere of plutonium and surround it with a complex arrangement of conventional explosives. By perfectly detonating these explosive lenses at the exact same microsecond, you create a perfectly symmetrical shockwave.
That compresses the core.
Yes. It compresses the solid metal core to twice its normal density, achieving critical mass in a fraction of a microsecond. The mathematics, the fluid dynamics, and the precise engineering required to perfectly synchronize those fast and slow explosive lenses took the brightest minds in the world years to master.
And Theodore Hall essentially just packed up all those years of agonizing trial and error, all that complex fluid dynamic math, and handed the cheat sheet directly to Moscow.
He really did.
Yeah.
The Soviets were so thrilled they referred to him by the affectionate code name, the Young One.
The Young One.
Yeah. Because of the incredibly specific, highly technical details Theodore Hall provided, the Soviet Union bypassed years of failed experiments. They were able to successfully detonate their first nuclear weapon, the RDS-1, in August 1949.
That's incredibly fast.
And the RDS-1 wasn't just a similar bomb, it was practically a carbon copy of the American Fat Man design.
And this detonation completely shocked the United States government. I mean, American intelligence estimates heavily suggested that the Soviets were, at least until 1953, if not much later, away from reaching this milestone.
Right. The timeline of the Cold War was instantly accelerated.
But the United States wasn't completely blind. They had their own technological marvels happening in the world of counterintelligence. Let's dig into the Venona Project, because this is where the story turns into a massive dilemma for the federal government.
The Venona Project. This was a massive, highly classified, code-breaking effort initiated by the United States and the United Kingdom, specifically targeting Soviet diplomatic and intelligence communications.
Okay.
The Soviets used a cryptographic system known as the one-time pad. Mathematically speaking, if a one-time pad is used correctly, it is entirely unbreakable.
Unbreakable.
Unbreakable. It relies on a key of random numbers that is used only once and then immediately destroyed.
So if it's mathematically unbreakable, how did the Venona Project crack it?
Through human error on the Soviet side. During the immense logistical strain of the Second World War, the companies printing these random number pads in the Soviet Union fell behind. And under pressure, they made a catastrophic mistake. They printed duplicate pages of the pads and distributed them to different outposts.
Oh, so they reused the one-time pad.
Exactly. When American codebreakers noticed repeating patterns of numbers in intercepted telegraphs, they realized the keys had been reused. With that tiny wedge, they began the agonizingly slow process of decrypting years of backlogged Soviet cables.
Wow.
And in December 1946, the Venona Project finally managed to crack the encrypted cables of the Soviet Interior Ministry. And those intercepted telegraphs revealed the undeniable, terrifying existence of Soviet espionage deep within the Manhattan Project.
And those decrypted messages eventually allowed the government to identify Theodore Hall as the source of the implosion leak. The Federal Bureau of Investigation literally knocked on his door in 1950.
They did.
Put yourself in that room for a second. You are an FBI agent. You have the man who gave away the atomic bomb sitting right in front of you. But here is the baffling outcome. Theodore Hall was interrogated, but he never cracked.
Nope, he held firm.
He never confessed. And unlike other spies who were caught, like Klaus Fuchs, a German communist who fully confessed, or Julius Rosenberg, Ethel Rosenberg, and David Greenglass, who faced severe punishments and even execution, Theodore Hall was never punished.
It's really hard to wrap your head around.
He lived out his life quietly, eventually moving to the United Kingdom to work as a researcher, and he died in 1999 without ever spending a single day in a courtroom.
The reason he walked free presents one of the most fascinating ethical and tactical dilemmas in intelligence history. The United States government was terrified of using the Venona Project decrypts in an open court of law.
Why?
Well, if they introduced those translated cables as evidence to convict Theodore Hall, they would be forced to publicly admit to the world, and specifically to the Soviet Union, that they had successfully broken the Soviet codes.
Oh, right. They would lose their ability to read the enemy's mind.
Precisely. It was a massive intelligence advantage that they were unwilling to surrender for the sake of one conviction.
Yeah.
Because Theodore Hall and Saville Sachs held their nerve and never confessed, and because there was absolutely no secondary physical evidence linking them to the espionage post-war, the government made a calculated decision.
A huge decision.
They decided to let the man who gave away the atomic bomb walk away, rather than expose their code-breaking success.
It is stunning. They prioritized the method over the man. But what actually motivated Theodore Hall in the first place?
Well, in his later years, he gave interviews claiming he leaked the secrets not out of malice toward the United States, but because he deeply feared a post-war American monopoly on atomic weapons.
Interesting.
He stated that he believed the nuclear-armed Soviet Union would level the playing field and act as a necessary deterrent against a potential nuclear war.
It is a profound, if highly controversial, rationalization.
Definitely. Theodore Hall viewed the Soviet Union not as a mortal enemy, but as the ally that had bled the most to defeat Nazi Germany on the Eastern Front.
Right.
He was a teenager who was terrified of what an unchecked, unilaterally armed United States might do, especially if the country fell into a post-war economic depression with a right-wing government. He genuinely believed, in his own mind, that he was saving the world by distributing the power of mutually assured destruction.
I understand the psychological framing, but let's look at the sheer irony here. General Leslie Richard Groves spends billions displacing thousands of people and building hidden cities.
Yeah.
And the most critical component is just smuggled out by a college student who fancies himself a geopolitical philosopher.
It's wild.
How does someone as brilliant as J. Robert Oppenheimer, the man running the entire scientific apparatus of Los Alamos, not realize his own inner circle is heavily compromised?
That points to the fundamental vulnerability of any massive organization.
Right.
You cannot easily police ideology. J. Robert Oppenheimer was singularly focused on the immense physics challenges, the engineering hurdles, and the daily administration of thousands of scientists. He was not a counterintelligence officer.
No, he's a physicist.
Exactly.
Yeah.
However, J. Robert Oppenheimer's failure to spot spies like Theodore Hall and Klaus Fuchs later came back to haunt him terribly. And a large part of why it ruined him was because J. Robert Oppenheimer had his own incredibly deep, complicated ties to the Communist Party.
His background is a counterintelligence nightmare. Long before the war, during the Great Depression, J. Robert Oppenheimer was highly sympathetic to left-wing causes.
Very sympathetic.
He was documented donating $1,000 a month, which was a fortune back then, to communist causes through his close friend, Dr. Addis. Many of his personal friends, his own brother and his sister-in-law, were known card-carrying party members.
Yeah.
And perhaps most significantly, he had a very intense, long-term romantic relationship with Jean Tatlock, who was a highly active, prominent member of the Communist Party in San Francisco.
And to the military security apparatus, these associations made J. Robert Oppenheimer an unparalleled security risk.
I can imagine.
When he was first nominated to lead the scientific effort, the military security officers flatly refused to grant his security clearance.
Really? They blocked him at first.
They tried to. It was only because General Leslie Richard Groves personally intervened, overriding the furious objections of the security personnel, that J. Robert Oppenheimer was allowed to proceed.
Wow.
General Leslie Richard Groves believed that J. Robert Oppenheimer's unique genius, his ability to understand every single facet of the physics and to manage the massive egos of the scientists, was absolutely indispensable to the project's success. He took a massive calculated risk.
But the shadow of those ties never actually left him. Even while he was building the bomb, he was constantly monitored. His mail was opened, his phone was tapped, and his movements were tracked. And eventually, in the intense paranoia of the early Cold War, those ties were weaponized. In 1953, powerful political enemies within the government, specifically Charles Murphy and Louis Strauss, orchestrated a grueling security hearing.
Yes, the Oppenheimer security hearing.
They successfully used his past associations with people like Jean Tatlock, combined with his post-war opposition to the development of the vastly more powerful hydrogen bomb, to formally revoke his security clearance. It effectively ended his government career and deeply tarnished his public legacy.
While historical consensus firmly maintains that J. Robert Oppenheimer was definitely not a spy, his tragic personal life and his close proximity to prominent communist figures fuel a much darker layer of historical analysis.
Oh, definitely.
When we look at the fate of his inner circle, we move out of the realm of proven espionage and step directly into the murky, deeply unsettling waters of alleged government assassination.
This brings us to the deeply suspicious circumstances surrounding the death of his former fiancée, Jean Tatlock. Jean Tatlock and J. Robert Oppenheimer had officially ended their romantic relationship, but they maintained a very deep, secretive connection. In June 1943, right in the middle of the project, J. Robert Oppenheimer traveled to San Francisco.
Right.
He spent the night with her, deliberately lying to military officials about the true purpose of his trip. Naturally, counterintelligence agents followed him, sitting outside her apartment all night. And tragically, that was the last time he ever saw her alive.
In January 1944, Jean Tatlock was found dead in her apartment. The scene was grim. She was found submerged in her bathtub. An autopsy revealed the presence of chloral hydrate in her system, a powerful barbiturate that induces heavy sleep, but also a substance historically commonly known in the criminal underworld as a knockout drop.
Right. And the official police ruling was suicide. She had a history of clinical depression, but when you examine the context, the alarm bells start ringing.
They certainly do.
You have an active communist who possesses proven, undeniable emotional influence over the most important military scientists in the United States. She is found dead in a highly unusual manner, submerged in water with knockout drugs in her bloodstream, shortly after being heavily surveilled by military intelligence agents who view her as a massive threat.
And the conspiracy theory that emerged, which has been debated by historians for decades, posits that Jean Tatlock was assassinated by intelligence operatives.
It's chilling.
The speculation is rooted in the government's absolute terror of her ideological influence over J. Robert Oppenheimer. Given her deep communist ties, security officials lived in fear that she could emotionally manipulate him, blackmail him, or convince him to pass nuclear secrets to the Soviets.
Right.
According to this theory, military operatives forcefully drugged her with chloral hydrate, incapacitated her, and staged her drowning in the bathtub to permanently eliminate a critical vulnerability in the Manhattan Project's security web.
And frankly, when you look at the documented, verified historical record of government intelligence agencies during the Cold War, when you look at the later shocking revelations of targeted overseas assassinations, or the CIA's MK-Ultra program, which illegally dosed citizens with drugs, it is not entirely out of the realm of possibility for people to suspect foul play here.
No, it's really not.
If the government was willing to neutralize external ideological threats like Jean Tatlock, we have to look at how they handled the men inside the room who began to crack under the moral weight of the bomb. Which brings us to the tragic end of James Forrestal.
James Forrestal is a profoundly tragic historical figure. He was the United States Secretary of the Navy during the war, and later he became the very first United States Secretary of Defense.
Very high up.
Extremely high. He was intimately involved in the highest levels of oversight regarding the atomic program. But as the theoretical physics turned into a brutal, world-ending reality, James Forrestal began to suffer from profound mental agitation. He was consumed by an overwhelming sense of guilt, particularly regarding the decision to drop atomic weapons on the civilian populations in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
He wasn't just silently guilty, though. He actively fought against it. He campaigned passionately to warn the Japanese about the nature of the nuclear weapons before they were dropped, desperately trying to give them a chance to surrender and avoid the slaughter.
Yes, he did.
When that failed, the guilt absolutely consumed him. His mental state deteriorated rapidly. He was reportedly pacing the halls, suffering from extreme paranoia, writing frantic letters. He officially resigned from his post in March 1949, citing unspecified illness, but it was universally understood to be a complete mental breakdown.
Right.
He was admitted to the Bethesda Naval Hospital for psychiatric treatment, and shortly after his admission, he died by falling from a high-story window of the hospital.
Officially, his death was ruled a tragic suicide, resulting from his severe depression. But among conspiracy theorists, and even some skeptical historians, the physical circumstances of his death are highly contested.
Right, there are some strange details.
There were alleged scuff marks found near the window ledge, and the sash of his bathrobe was tied around his neck, which some interpret as signs of a violent struggle. The prevailing theory is that James Forrestal was murdered, that intelligence operatives staged a hanging gone wrong, or physically forced him from the window.
Just to silence him.
Exactly. Why? Because his vocal, passionate dissent and his increasingly fragile mental state made him an unprecedented liability. The government simply could not afford to have a former Secretary of Defense publicly agonizing over the morality of the atomic bomb, or worse, leaking highly sensitive nuclear strategies due to his compromised state of mind.
It paints a terrifying picture. We see a culture of absolute uncompromising secrecy, where anyone who poses a threat, whether they are an ideological threat like Jean Tatlock or a psychological, moral threat like James Forrestal, ends up dead under highly questionable circumstances.
It really does.
And this culture of silencing dissent wasn't just applied to individuals, it was systematically applied to the very nature of the weapon itself. We have to examine the massive radiation cover-up.
This is a huge piece of the puzzle. When the bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the scientists involved certainly understood that there would be a release of radiation. However, they fundamentally, catastrophically underestimated the lingering deadly effects of radiation sickness, which the press and the public came to call the atomic plague.
The atomic plague.
Yeah. People in Japan who had miraculously survived the initial blast and the thermal heat were dying days, weeks, and months later from mysterious, gruesome symptoms, their hair falling out, massive internal bleeding, and plummeting white blood cell counts.
But General Leslie Richard Groves and the United States military apparatus actively, aggressively suppressed the reality of this radiation sickness.
They had to, in their minds.
Right, they had a massive optics problem. They absolutely did not want the world to view the atomic bomb as an illegal, inhumane, biological or chemical weapon that poisoned the Earth. They needed it to be seen purely as a massive, impressive, conventional explosive.